we get rid of those layers next? Not tonight, but for the next one.
That would mean getting rid of all the housekeeping slides.
Really?
Yeah, because that's how it's set up.
Okay.
Good sound.
I
There's got to be something louder than your silence. Hesitation when your tongue slips.
chains. I wondered why, but couldn't explain. I saw you in my dreams. You're gonna set me free. I looked for you. Did you look for me? Now that I found you, where do we go from here? Now that I know you, how to explain it? Tell me how we met. Did you hold me tightly then? Was I all that you had wished for? But looking at the waters we left, and all the borders we kept now that I found you, where do we go from here? And now that I know you, how to explain it? And how do you live? Where do we go from How do you
I live in an old house down by the seaside, working an office, but I hate what that feels like. I collect elephants, I got nowhere to put them, but they're important to me. And I hope you call me when you feel alone, when you're missing home. Send a siren out to the sea. If not for you, then do it for me. Sometimes I choke up on nothing but fresh air. Open the fridge and I know there's nothing in I could dead and say my shit everywhere, but they're important to me. And I hope you call me when you feel alone, when you're missing home. Send a siren out to sea. When I feel you, do it for me. And I hope you call me when you feel low, when you're missing home. Send a siren out to the sea. When I feel you, do it for me. I hope you call me when you feel low, when you're missing home. Send a siren out to the sea. When I feel you, do it for me.
That look on me is everlasting. These books I read don't have the answers on it. Never thought that I'd be where I am today. Never thought that I'd see who I am today. Sitting on the floor with all my thoughts. All I ever do is watch the leaves. I keep running back to you, I don't know what for. I just cannot seem to find my peace. And still I'd wait and I'd wait and I'd wait, but you never came. And still I'd wait and I'd wait, my mistake, knowing you never change. I'm ashamed, I'm ashamed, I'm the only one I've got to blame.
a taxi to a runner. My blue jeans ripping at the knees, sipping cola, ice cold. Stole her back and it was white gold. Took a ride, cruising, radio tuning. Went to the place down by the creek where we used to sit, we used to speak about moving cities, selling CDs. Now you're telling me you're moving on your own. I just want you to know I'm sorry if I held you back. I don't want you to go. I find it hard to tell you that I haven't been thinking straight, and I guess I never knew just what I had. Or was it all just a daydream? Take me back, take me back, take me back to the sweet days, sweet days, sweet days. We were close that summer. You told me you wanna go away together. So every day we drink sangria, no straw. On the beach, volleyball. Wake up, sleeping, round two, round two. We went to the place down by the coast, where we used to talk, we used to smoke like James Dean, Brando. You're like Monroe. Now you're telling me you're leaving on your own. I just want you to know I'm sorry if I held you back. I don't want you to go. I find it hard to tell you that I haven't been thinking straight, and I guess I never knew just what I had. Or was it all just a daydream? Take me back, take me back, take me back to the sweet days, sweet days. Take me back to the sweet days. The streetlights lit me from your house. It was cold and I was wishing I was someone else. It was all this I was seeking out on my own. Batteries dead, can't call my phone. I took my feet to Boundary Street. Had to mess with Meg for clarity. I came here on my own volition, seen it all through tunnel vision. I was looking for a reason and a ride home. I was looking for a reason and a ride home. I was thinking how you told me it was terrible. I was looking for a reason and a ride home, a ride home. I was looking for a reason, yeah. Going home, going home.
Well, hello everyone. Welcome. Yes, good morning. Was that good morning or good evening? Well, welcome. A very warm welcome to all of you. I'm Andrew Crawford, for those that haven't met me before, and on behalf of Rock, who's hopefully back on deck very, very soon, my job here is to MC tonight. Other times when I'm here, I chair the branch executive committee and I'm part of the board here. Look, tonight I'm very, very pleased to say this was a sold-out event. The empty chairs are obviously people dealing with New South Wales Transport right now. Or access to the building, Phil, thank you. But I'm very, very pleased to welcome you here warmly, and I, of course, want to say I'm acknowledging the traditional owners of this great land we meet on, the Gadigal people, where we now stand. We pay our respects to elders past, present and emerging. Thank you. One of the things we take very seriously here at ACS is your safety, and I really am delighted to say that up there we have just the normal places where you'd expect to find the restrooms are up there. Our innovation hub just on the other side here, and also the corridor that leads to our lifts. Now, if there is an emergency, follow me, I'll be first out. The emergency exits are located at either end of the main corridor. We would say to you, please follow our ACS staff who are giving you a wave at the moment, back of the room. Catherine, thanks very much, right over there. So we've got lots of people here. Now, if you do need to leave the facility tonight before it ends and you want to return back into the building, you must let one of the ACS staff know that so that you can get back into the building. It is Fort Knox here, as Phil was noting before. Okay, so we will conclude the event right on time around 8 p.m. To exit the building. Just in case you don't know, there's an image up there that shows you wait for the green light. Don't try and tailgate someone. I saw someone attempting that last week. Nasty injury. The glass doors will close quite quickly on you. So just wait for the green light, and there's a button there that you can push. Okay. Blank screen. All right. So I must have a missing sheet of paper here. Thank you. I'm so glad I've got a backup plan. So page 2 is missing. So, also not only follow the conversation at hashtag ACS New South Wales. I hope that we're on the slide where I can introduce our 2 wonderful speakers tonight. Thank you very much, ladies, for being here so early and continuing the great series of sessions that the team here are putting on. I'm really glad and delighted that we're going to hear from both Hilary and Melanie tonight. Hilary, if we start with Hilary, is a Director of Alternative Legal Services at Herbert Smith Freehills. I learnt that you're also in the same building as I spend most of my time today in ANZ Tower. Hilary has built a global career working for numerous industry leaders in technology across the United States and Asia Pacific. Melanie works alongside Hilary in Alternative Legal Services as a Head of Client Solutions at Herbert Smith Freehills. Melanie specialises in designing and implementing solutions for volume-based information and data-intensive legal work using a combination of specialised skills, defined processes and technology. Show them the usual welcome, please.
And welcome. It's great to see so many people here that are interested in legal technology. Who knew? Before we do get started, a quick poll of the room. How many people here are from the legal industry? I know Philip is. Okay, all right, a good spread. Pardon? No, they're not. But tech? tech, the rest. Great to see. Okay, so as I think we've pitched it probably the right way, Mel. As Andrew said, my name's Hilary Goodyear. I'm the Director of Alternative Legal Services at Herbert Smith Freehills. We will talk a little bit later about what that actually means. I am a lawyer by training, but I saw the light, and probably about 10 years ago I left being a tech lawyer and moved into more commercial and operational roles within the tech industry, firms like IBM and NTT. Presenting with me today is Mel Ryan, who is ALT's Head of Client Solutions. So for the techies in the room, you can think of Mel as the solution architect of legal services. All right, let me see if I can get the technology working. There we go. So there is a lot of information, and I think more to the point, misinformation out there about legal technology, its capabilities, how it's being used, and I think more to the point, how it's going to do all the lawyers out of jobs. Our plan is not to add to that hype today. We're going to talk to you, I think, very specifically and very practically about some of the key technologies that are being used right now by firms and by clients, where we see that technology going, how those technologies are transforming the provision of legal services, and then, of course, how that's impacting the role of the lawyer. I think you'll find, probably unsurprisingly, that lawyers are not really at the forefront of tech, so I don't think you should expect to hear about us kind of leading the charge tonight in innovative technology, but hopefully we can give you a better idea of how it's being applied in the legal industry and in legal services. So before we jump straight in, I want to set the scene a little bit, and I don't think there's anybody in this room who is not familiar with the companies on that slide, perhaps aside from the two down the bottom. So on the left-hand side, we've got a very diverse set of industries, different sectors, different clients, services, and I guess more so different business models. On the right are the disruptors, and they all have one thing in common. They're tech companies, right? So when you look at a picture like this, I think it would be a very brave person to suggest that law is immune to disruption in the same way that hotels, transport, media, and retail have been disrupted. But I can assure you there are still many out there who think that way. So a little bit about who we are, not an advertisement, but more why are we here talking to you about legal technology. So ALT is one of the 6 practice groups of global law firm Herbert Smith Freehills. HSF operates in 28 countries, and ALT has teams in Australia, London, Belfast, Shanghai and Johannesburg. Here in Australia, the ALT team has a dedicated tech hub on St Kilda Road in Melbourne, and we have teams in Sydney, Brisbane and Perth. So what is alternative legal services? Well, for us, it means that we use what we like to think of as a unique combination of people, process and technology to perform mostly high volume and information intensive legal work in a more innovative, efficient and cost-effective manner. So what does that mean practically? In a large dispute, we might use technology, or we do use technology, to do the discovery and document review side of that dispute, often with millions of documents that we need to sift through. In today's heavy regulatory environment and in the context of the Royal Commission, we might use technology to review literally millions of customer files for the fee for no service to see whether any remediation is due to those clients. We use technology in due diligence to support large M&A transactions, and of course increasingly in commercial contracting, starting with some of the more kind of volume-based transactions like leasing and financing transactions, but increasingly moving into more general commercial contracting. ALT supports both our frontline teams at HSF, so our lawyers, but also our clients' in-house teams directly. And we are the biggest users of legal technology, both within our firm, but Relativity, which is one of the platforms that we will talk about a little bit later, has just announced that HSF is actually the largest user of the Relativity platform in the Asia-Pacific region. So I guess a bit of context as to why it's us here tonight talking to you about legal tech. I think this slide probably says it all in terms of how congested and confusing the legal tech landscape is becoming. And don't worry, we're not going to talk about all of those technologies on the slide, but we will talk a little bit more broadly about the categories that they fall into. So practice management, artificial intelligence, risk and compliance, e-discovery and document review, and I guess the sexier area, AI and automation. So why is there so much buzz around legal technology? Why is it that this event was sold out tonight? Well, as we said in the invite, in the last 5 years, there's been a 484% increase in new legal services patents globally. The rate of investments in legal startups has also grown exponentially in recent years, with almost 2,000 legal startups in the US, each receiving over $1 million in VC funding. And for those of you who are dedicated to following the legal tech press, yes, there is legal tech press. Earlier this month, a company called Kira Systems raised $50 million in its Series A round. So I guess that just really highlights how much activity and how much money is being poured into this space. What we're finding in alt is probably consistent with industry trends, that the clients and the companies are actually better at this than the law firms. And that's probably not surprising given our clients are banks, oil and gas, insurance, and these are companies that have really been driving the adoption of tech in their businesses way back when lawyers were still using the fax machine. So that's to provide you with a bit of context. Now that I've set the scene, I'm going to hand over to Mel, who's going to explore some of the technologies in further detail.
Hilary will be back later. So I'm going to take you through the technology, which if it's a little bit dry, feel free to go and get yourselves a drink. I won't be offended. So we're just going to look at the current landscape and just some of these areas where we're seeing the most movement and some of the things that we're actually doing at HSF. Excellent. So probably the big area that is probably happening now and is probably been the most transformative is just automation of the delivery of our services. And probably the key areas are automation of documents, practice management and expertise, and actually automating our advice. In the area of documents, we're seeing a big uplift in contracts being automated. To date, most precedent contract systems really have been done in Word. And that's quite a volatile platform, very difficult to manage versions, and very difficult to manage outputs. So what we find is companies like Thomson Reuters are developing platforms for us to actually draft contracts in an automated environment. And it's probably worth noting that Thomson Reuters was a publication house for law, text, and case law, and is now really transforming itself into a technology company and moving forward, actually taking law into the future. Other companies in this space, like Siegel, which is out of Hong Kong, formerly known as Dragon Law, also automate contracts, but also allow you to actually purchase your precedents online. So you no longer actually even need to be drafting your own precedents in-house. Actually, the technology companies are devising them for you and allowing you to update them as you need. There's Legatics in this space that actually allows you to manage whole transactions online using platforms, particularly in the banking and finance sector. A big law company, Allen Over in the UK, uses that platform to manage all of its financial transactions. And one area that we're seeing, which is hitting across many industries and certainly isn't particular to law, is companies like HotDocs, which pretty much allows you to automate any template and then actually integrate it into other systems. Practice management has always been a big area for law firms. In big law, we record our time in 6-minute units. That generates bills, and that's actually how we charge clients. What's happening now is our clients are starting to practice manage us and bring in their own systems. And so you're seeing Australian-born companies, Zakia and Lorcadia, where clients are actually managing what work we're doing, how well we're performing against cost estimates, and exactly which members of the panel are performing best. So we're finding reporting coming out of these systems actually is an annual event where we'll go and sit with a client, and these reports will actually be shown to us and will be benchmarked on performance now which is definitely a revolution for law firms. Also in that area, there's smoke balls. So you're finding companies were always hit with lots of different generic invoices. Usually they're very weighty, heavy invoices from law firms, which describe every event we've ever done. What they're asking for us to do now is actually you all uniform and pump into our system. So you're seeing e-billing systems like Smokeball. Again, the client's taking control of their panel and taking control of their advisors. Probably be amiss not to mention DocuSign. DocuSign is obviously certainly not pertinent to law, but will revolutionise how contracts are executed and how documents are approved and signed. There's probably about 2 million plus users the last time I checked their statistics. We're not seeing in a lot of companies a huge move towards the use of DocuSign, which is quite amazing really in a legal business where actually executing documents happens constantly. And there has been some issues where the law hasn't kept up with the technology, and there's some debate in Australia that if a deed is executed by e-signature, is it actually executed? But I think actually what will happen is the law will catch up and these systems will take over. And probably automation of advice is a really big change for a lot of law firms. I mean, advice is always given individually by humans and then written down ad nauseum in Word documents. And what we're trying to do now with systems like Neota Logic is actually to harness that advice and present it to clients in a way that's easy to digest. And I'm going to give you a little bit of a demo of Neota Logic. We can show you that a bit more in general. But we're also seeing expert systems, particularly around the world of compliance, as Hilary mentioned, the Royal Banking Commission and the 2 other commissions that are coming up into energy and to the age crisis will just increase further on companies to come up with platforms to manage compliance and report to regulators. So in the automation space, this is Contract Express. It's not the most exciting platform you've ever seen, but what happens is you take a document and where information needs to be inputted, it's coded. And the inputter, the actual user, fills in a questionnaire to put that information in, replacing the old-style Word document. We find probably using these platforms gives us about 30% efficiency in document production, but what it also does is actually manage your risk, so you have a lot of consistency of the documents you produce. Thomson Reuters also have this platform connect to other systems they're running, so their case law, you can be guided as you're filling out these types of automation platforms to case law, and it also integrates with DocuSign. Automation actually is probably creating a new job in the legal sector, which is being a document automator, because you need to be able to actually understand how contracts work and how documents are drafted and the nuances of law, and actually also be able to apply the tech. So we've just created a document automation team at HSF. In the expert system space, we're creating ability to advise clients and how to apply legal issues and come up with outcomes using Neota Logic, which is a highly adaptable platform for certainly not applicable just to law, but to many, many industries. And we use this. This example is to guide a client whether they're breaching anti-money laundering issues. And basically how we do this is you gather your knowledge of anti-money laundering and you set out a system based on decision tree outcomes, and a client will take a transaction, ask questions using the platform, and they will get an answer at the end whether they're compliant or not. Some of the power of a lot of these systems, particularly for our clients and in the regulatory space, is actually that you've put a process in place that you can demonstrate to regulators that you actually are taking these types of regulatory compliance issues seriously, and you've actually put a due process in place. It doesn't necessarily mean that data won't be breached. The other big area is artificial intelligence, and I don't think there's a week that goes by in The Lawyer there isn't an article on artificial intelligence, and there's now a whole publication website called The Artificial Lawyer that talks about this in the legal space. The big areas for us are document review. One of our key services that we do is read lots and lots and lots of documents to give you advice on the outcomes. And the 2 areas we do that is either review contracts for a transaction to let you know what's in those contracts. Is it going to affect your transaction? Are there any obligations that you're taking on you may want to take on? And then what reduces your risk? We also do an awful lot of review in the dispute space. And so if you have a case that you either want to prosecute or is against you, you look at the period of time that the facts are in dispute, and you gather documents and you review them and you work out, have you got a strong case, what actually happened, what is the case against you. We use artificial intelligence tools to actually do a lot of that review now, purely driven by necessities and mother of invention. The volumes of documents that we're looking at now are huge, and the technology is being applied to help us actually not read everything anymore, but actually focus in on what we need to look at. Some other interesting areas in the document review space is with Thought River, where they're taking contracts and you're able to actually load up what your preferences are when agreeing to a contract. So, for example, you may insist there's a liability clause in a contract, and it will actually prompt you to actually tell you whether you should sign it or not, whether it's actually compliant to your personal company's requirements. And with Legal Robot, and I haven't seen this in action, so I don't know how well it does this, but it is actually, they're using AI to actually demystify contracts and take all the legalese out and turn them into plain language so you know what terms you're signing up to. Probably the big change for us is in the area of research. Back in the day, 20 years ago, when you did legal research and looked for an answer to a problem, you actually went and looked for books, and the smart thing was you knew which type of statute to look for or what case law to go and review. Then what happened is all of that material got digitized, and how you actually trying to find an answer was by keyword searches. But the keyword searches returned so many hits that you actually ended up wading through so much material to even find your answer in legal research. What's happening now with new platforms like Practical Law, Westlaw, LexisNexis, they're all using natural language processing AI tools so that you can ask a question that is in natural language, and it will put it in context, and your results are coming back. They're actually meaningful and targeted, which is actually a huge change for us in the research space. There's also some really clever tools coming out. One system called Cara that not only will take your research and actually start to prepare the memo that you were going to prepare as a graduate to the partner. So it really is changing that whole piece of was important to a law grad and a young lawyer to do research. It really is changing the time and effort that you'll be spending in that space. And then probably the big market leader in this area is Ross, which is a Toronto-based company who've used the IBM Watson platform, a platform that has got incredibly strong algorithms to mine data. And they've loaded every US case, statute, legislation across the whole of the US. So you can interrogate that using Ross and get research answers super quickly. In the AI space, there's also advice being given. I think for big law, these sort of chatbot advisory tools are probably a little bit harder for us because of the sort of law that we do can be very complex and very nuanced and harder to actually deliver advice with no human interaction. But I think in more straightforward legal environments, we're definitely seeing chatbots coming into play. Probably the market leader and the most famous is Do Not Pay. Do Not Pay is a chatbot that basically allows you, if you get a parking ticket, to ask a set of questions in natural language, and it will guide you on whether you actually can appeal that parking ticket. And if you can, it will give you the guidance on how to do it. That particular chatbot was developed by a guy called Josh Browder, who is an American English guy and is not a lawyer in any way, shape, or form, never went to law school. He's a coder. I mean, he's a coder at Stanford, but he's a coder. And he developed that because he actually was getting a lot of parking tickets. And he could see the natural process to actually arguing back. And he's taken that particular chatbot, and I think he's developed about 100 apps. IBM Watson have given him free rein to their platform. And he's now developed ways to complain and get money back from airlines, hotels, and then he also has now just developed a chatbot to help asylum seekers how to navigate the law too. So, yeah, Josh Browder, all lawyers beware. And so at HSF, we're not doing anything as exciting as that, as Josh Browder, but we are using tools like Kira, Luminous, and Heretic, and these are contract extraction tools. And they are changing the market for us because previously when we reviewed contracts, we just read them. And we read them in a linear way. We would capture the information, and then at the end of that, we'd try to pull it all together to give a client advice on what is happening across the suite of contracts. This is actually helping you do that immediately. So what happens is if you did get a set of contracts come in, you load them onto the system immediately will OCR them, make them text searchable. And then immediately what you can do is for clauses that have already been trained by the software through supervised learning, you actually can say, okay, I want to see all the termination clauses across my 100 contracts, and it will extract that for you. That's quite a game changer for us. Previously, that type of searching could only really be done at document level, which when you want to look at a contract clause isn't really very helpful. But actually for the software to be able to isolate and locate a clause and pull it out of a document actually has been very clever development in the technology. It really has created efficiency, and probably the main player is that it's risk managed. I think a lawyer at 3 o'clock in the morning is not as consistent as this software is going to be trying to locate a clause. But actually, if you tell a lawyer that, they won't agree with you. I'm sure you'll tell me that down there. But I will argue the point. Of course, with all these softwares, it's not perfect. It misses clauses. It over-includes. It certainly doesn't know everything that you're trying to do. But I think the important thing then is for us to just embrace the systems, put process around the issues, and just manage it. But still include the systems in your toolkit. And then the final area we're going to focus on is analytics. And I think analytics probably hits on these 3 areas for us. Law firms are actually starting to use analytics to look at their business. Again, this is very new for us to actually analyse these types of situations. So what we're using is things like Bright Flag to actually analyse our cost and where our costs are blowing out and how to actually manage that with clients. And actually starting to really drill down into what that 6-minute work actually equates to. You're seeing quite a big change in, which I think is quite an important development. There's a company called Qualmet who developed this piece of software to actually try to show you the value of your legal work. Very often in law, you'll produce a piece of legal work potentially in a huge transaction. And if you actually have done your job really well and there aren't any problems, it's really hard to actually demonstrate your value. And so actually lawyers struggle to then argue why we are so expensive. And so this type of software is actually trying to help you demonstrate value to clients, which I think is really quite an interesting manoeuvement of that sort of analytics. Analytics in investigations now, a big part of our work is to look at documents and to analyse the content of them and see if you have issues or if you have a case against us or if we have a defence to you. The big players in this market are Relativity and Nuix. Relativity is out of a software company out of Chicago. It's been around for at least 10 years. And it's probably the Salesforce of the legal industry, if you like. It's a big platform. It does a lot of document review and crunching of discovery documents, but it also has a lot of snap-ons, and a lot of companies are developing tools, particularly to add them to Relativity. And actually the company we were talking about earlier, Heretic, they're trying to build a contract review clause snap-on to that platform. So we spend a lot of time using Relativity and have a lot of our team who are well qualified in applying it too. The other area is NCASE, which you bring in very early in your piece. Often happens if you have an employee issue and you're worried about how an employee is operating in the company. NCASE is a tool that actually you can bring in, install on your client's software and IT systems, and actually monitor what's happening live on their business and use that to collect forensic evidence to then use later in court. So it's a really surreptitious way of collecting evidence early in a piece. And then what's happening also is companies like BrainSpace are bringing in different analytics to how we look at documents. We tend to look at documents as in what is the content and the context in which they've been written. BrainSpace is actually trying to analyse data and give you an idea of relationships and who's talking to who, when they were talking to who, neighbouring connections, and actually trying to give you an overview of the relationship of the matter. And they're also moving towards much more to using sentiment analytics in discovery, which actually tells you not the actual content of the document, but really what's the sentiment behind it, what's the attitude, what's the feeling, which you see a lot in marketing. Companies use it a lot. Political parties use it a lot to see what's happening out there in social media. And we're starting to use it much more in managing our cases and actually getting a sense of what's happening in a case. So it's changing quite a fair bit in that regard. And then in the advisory space, and I think this is quite a new area for us, a lot of the stuff that we talked about, we've already done. We just did it in a really laborious, manual way, and now we're starting to do tech. This area, and actually sort of doing more predictive analytics, we never really have done that much. Trying to advise a client on the outcome of a case really was based on your individual knowledge, your experience, your gut. We're really starting now to see software that is starting to advise clients on the outcomes of cases. So we have premonition. A lot of these are in the US too. So premonition would tell you the win rate of motions that are filed in particular courts. So that will actually lead you to go and file it in a particular court. And it also then will drive you to file it with particular lawyers. And a lot of Fortune 500 companies are already investing in this type of software and using it for their own strategic drivers. Blue Jay Legal is a Canadian company who actually use their machine learning to predict how courts will interpret new tax law. So they advertise that as a flight simulator for new tax law. So basically, you know what the likely ruling will be on the decisions you're going to make. Ravel analyses judges and judgments and their patterns, and so they can predict outcomes of your case, which before, as I say, a lawyer would be a gut instinct based on the facts. And Docket Alarm actually is working at a very high level. It's analysing all cases, state and federal, and just giving you trends in litigation, what's happening out there in the US. So I'm sure that other jurisdictions will start to embrace all of these technologies. Jurimetrics is a local Australian company, and start to actually give clients strategic advice based on data as opposed to gut. In this area, this is a bit of a snapshot of some of the work we do with relativity. Relativity we use for discovery, so it's usually one of our clients is being sued or is suing, and then at that point we go ahead and collect documents. And in this day and age, when you collect documents from a client, particularly big clients, you end up collecting something closer to the millions rather than the thousands of the days of old. When we collect them, they will be in lots of different formats. We always try and collect electronically. Emails, social media, the areas that information is being generated that may influence a case are just getting broader and broader and broader and harder to collect and harder to process. And just more information is being generated. And to be frank, you're more interested in those informal social media sources because they tend to have the best stuff in them. So we bring them back, we put them into systems like Relativity, and before any human touches it, we let the analytics go at it and just let it cluster information as much as we can and give us categories of information. So hopefully that allows us to focus on the good stuff, the interesting stuff, and ignore as much as possible all the irrelevant material. Once we've done that, what we'll often do is use predictive coding software, and that software will help us actually to code the documents. And what we do is we supervise the training of the software. And how it works, it gives you a little training set of documents, and you get someone who really knows the case well, usually a senior lawyer, and you get them to actually tell the software, yes, this document's relevant, this document's not. And eventually, after it starts to pick up the beat, if you're consistent enough, it will actually go away and code all the other documents for you. So it really is starting to take away from lawyers the manual review of old, and we're starting to use more and more technology. And what will be interesting is how this actually starts to play out between parties, that we'll start to agree not to review documents, that we'll just use technology, and you'll get what the positives that I get, and we'll exchange based on that. And that courts, I think, will also join the party in that. And there's a lot of cases in the US that prove they're happy for predictive coding to be used rather than the old-fashioned eye over it. And so one of the areas that we actually were asked to talk about tonight was Australian National Blockchain, because HSF has just made a big announcement in this space, so it felt very remiss not to mention it. But as a caveat, Hilary and I are not leading the charge on this, this amazing, actually, push towards building a national blockchain in Australia, but more than happy to share our thoughts on what we know. The Australian National Blockchain is basically a consortium of Herbert Smith Freehills, so us, IBM, and CSIRO Data 61 Lab, and basically they've come together to collaborate to basically try to build Australia's first cross-industry national platform for blockchain. It really is about being able to be large scale, open to multiple industries, to be permanent and reusable, open to the public, and it also needs to be legally compliant in Australia, is one of our drivers. The people who are interested in this also with us and will join us on the pilot, I'm sure, will be regulators, the banks, law firms, and other Australian businesses will be part of it. And look, it is a pilot, and with success, hopefully, we'll roll this out across Australia. Herbert Smith Freehill's role in it is very much focused on the smart contracts piece. We actually are using IBM's blockchain platform to do this. So blockchain, what is it? I'm not going to get into that tonight. It's too big a story, and it should be left to people more qualified. But it's basically a digital agreement on a peer-to-peer network, and it uses distributed ledger technology. And if everyone is in agreement, then a block is added to the chain, and through that collaboration, it creates security across the blockchain. It creates a higher accuracy because everyone agrees to each block being added to the chain. And it decentralizes the need to work with multiple systems and actually puts the power back into those who are in the blockchain. To date, a lot of blockchains that have been developed have been very small scale. They're not repeatable. The parties who have used them have had to put a lot of work in and collaborate very strongly to actually get the blockchain to work. And this is one of the drivers for the consortium to actually try to find a platform that's permanent and reusable. And the most important thing, I think, from the HSF perspective was also to create an ecosystem that we could then start to develop smart contracts, which we haven't really had before. And there's been a lot of drive from our clients who really don't want us to talk about it anymore. They want us to actually start to do this. So with AMB, what can it do? Well, I think it probably can disrupt a lot of the digital economy. I think the banks will be very interested in how this is going to actually play out and how settlement's going to work, as will regulators, and probably anyone who is in the industry is using a lot of contractual relationships. I think it will be important that a lot of go-betweens, a lot of agencies, and a lot of different interconnectors between businesses will really not be required. So that will certainly change the landscape. And also, it will just digitise the negotiation and the signing of contracts to a level we've never seen before. And from that, then it will also allow us to run smart contracts and actually administer contracts via the platform. So looking at smart contracts in detail, how we see this working is there will be an ability to draft a smart contract that potentially can have smart clauses that actually can then connect to other external data in the Internet of Things, and actually can then self-execute based on specific conditions that have been coded into the contract. So a very small example of how that could work, and obviously it's exponential how this could actually work in reality, is in this example, there's a construction site, and I suggest through AI, there's some sensors that would record the time and the date of delivery and the load that's been brought in, and it would be a block in the chain. That in itself would trigger a clause in the contract, and between the construction company and the bank, if all the conditions had been met, that the contract itself could approve payment and organise payment with the bank to be sent to the deliverer of the load. All of that without human touch, and all of that to be coded into the contract. I think interestingly for lawyers, we obviously have always written in Word and got across what we want the obligation of the contract to be in that format. What we'll now need to think about is how we actually take that information obligations, turn it into some form of logic, and then actually how we turn that logic into some form of code. And actually, are we going to be able to, if you could read the first document, are you actually going to be able to actually check the code, and how's that going to work in reality, and what are the new jobs that's going to generate, and translators, etc. So it's a really big change in law for us. And I think the effect will be quite broad on the economy as well. And Paul Hutchinson is the representative for this A&B from IBM, and he's working with Natasha Bleicher, who is our representative of HSF. And as his quote said, blockchain will be to transactions what the internet was to communication. What starts as a tool for sharing information becomes transformational once adoption is widespread. So yes, it's a very, very exciting launch that HSF have just been involved in. And yes, I'm sure that we could work with Catherine maybe to organise for some people to come in and talk in more detail about blockchain. So what are the new technologies we think are going to tip on the horizon shortly, and how do we think they're going to innovate? And so in quick roundup, I think from the automation perspective, even though these technologies are going to help us with drafting, I think eventually what we'll see is a lot of AI overlay to the drafting. So we won't just be actually using systems to automate and include clauses to a contract. The systems will start to suggest clauses that you should put into the contract. It will start to tell you to remove clauses. It will start to tell you to use different wording. In fact, it will start to do the job of what a junior lawyer does. And it will also, guide you on how to do that. I think we'll also see that in the arena of compliance, where online compliance systems and regulatory systems companies put in place they'll be notified by using AI that there's been a breach or there is issues. It will stop being so automated and it will start being more machine learnt, which of course then sort of opens up the doors of whether regulators will want automatic reporting and immediate reporting from those sorts of systems, which will be concerning for some clients. In the AI space, I think we'll see more and more of legal advice coming to you through chatbots for more simple, straightforward, that can give you end-to-end advice, and probably for more complex scenarios through expert systems. I think we'll see a big increase in the use of analytics and actually law starting to analyse law and starting to actually, with all the data we create, actually start to mine it. And research, actually, I don't think will be recognisable from when we started. I think it will move quite strongly to being driven by AI engines and a very small part of your day. For us, importantly, is all of these AI tools only have any power if they have any data. If AI is the pupil, the learner, data is the teacher, it needs access to the data. Interestingly, for law, we are not big sharers of data. We see our contracts as our IP and our collateral, and we're not huge sharers, even though they're out in the marketplace. It'll be really interesting to see how much we start to collaborate going forward and actually stop having so what you would say an HSF NDA contract, but actually start to have a national template that is the same contract for everyone to use, and there are only very small deviations from standard, which will actually change quite a lot of how we draft into the future. So I think that rounds us up to where we think the innovation will be. Like, we'll keep doing things in law, but hopefully we'll be doing them better and using tech, which I think will still be advising, we'll still be predicting outcomes, we'll still be reviewing documents, we'll still be drafting. I just think we'll be using these technology platforms. But I think that things that will disrupt that we've not done before or will stop doing is blockchain definitely will disrupt us. Starting to analyse ourselves with analytics will change. And another area I think will change is actually how we educate our grads and bring up lawyers, because very often how they were trained was by doing repetitive tasks, but if we're not doing that anymore, I think we'll have to start to educate through different means. So on that note, I will hand over to Hilary, and she will wrap up on the role of the lawyer.
Okay. Thanks. So just very quickly, and then we'll throw it open to questions. So how is all of this technology, in a really practical sense, transforming the legal industry? I think, to my mind, it's, firstly, it's significantly broadening what we've traditionally understood as law, the nature of the services, the players, and the roles. I think the lawyer is naturally now going to move more up the value chain. I don't think it's a matter of there not being lawyers anymore. I think as the technology starts to take over some of the more routine and repetitive tasks, what we're going to find is the lawyer will naturally move up into the more strategic and complex areas of advice. I think undoubtedly lawyers are going to need to be tech savvy, and this is not one of our strengths generally as an industry. I think we were talking yesterday, we had an event at HSF, and what we're finding is it's actually the graduates who are coming into the firm and really driving the transformation and the adoption of technology. And we actually at HSF have a reverse mentoring program where it's our graduates who are actually mentoring our partners in the use and adoption of technology. It's actually been really successful. The industry, I think, is becoming increasingly multidisciplinary. So I'll use cybersecurity as an example. Back, in the day of, if there was a data breach, the role of the lawyer would really be to advise on, the liability and your obligations at law, your obligations to the client, your obligations to notify the regulator, and then any remediation that was due. What we're finding now is that firms are launching cyber teams, and they will be combinations of forensics experts, technologists, accountants, PR and media, and lawyers that can provide a holistic kind of solution to a problem for a client. And I really believe that that's where the law is going to go. It's no longer going to be focused on the services and the practice groups that we have, but the problem that we're trying to solve for the client. I think law is no longer owned by the lawyers, and that is, I think, probably one of the most controversial statements, but things like Do Not Pay being the number one chatbot out there in the market in the legal industry, being developed by somebody other than a lawyer. And I think probably most importantly, it will provide greater access to justice. And this is another kind of topic that is quite controversial in the legal sector at the moment, because it's about balancing consumer protection and regulation and making sure that legal advice is provided by qualified lawyers, but then opening up the legal industry and opening up access to justice. And then finally, as promised, what is this doing for future roles in law? Traditionally, tech roles in law have really been limited to, I would say, legal research and e-discovery. Over recent years, we've really seen that explode and expanded into areas like forensic, big data, AI, analytics. And this calls for much more specialised tech skills. My team, the Alternative Legal Services team, we have about 120 people in Australia. Almost a third of those are technologists who do not have law degrees. So I think that just really shows how the legal industry is changing and how tech skills are becoming so much more critical to the delivery of legal services. And there is increasing demand for, data protection, automation, legal process design, and to Mel's point, blockchain skills. So perhaps your next role might actually be in law. And on that note, I think we can open it up to questions.
Thanks very much. We actually have about 10 or so minutes for questions, so I'd like to kick off. Thank you very much, Mel and Hilary, for really giving us a really broad perspective of this, and also some really interesting things for us to think about. Who would like to kick off with a question? We have two here, so I think you were just there, and then we'll go the second mic up here. Raise your voice or come up the front.
For a number of years, about almost 18, 20 years. And one of the things, I really enjoyed your presentation today, because one of the things I had in my mind saying the technology is going so fast forward that one of the things actually bringing backwards is because of the legal framework, right? And that's something I always understood, and listening to you, what you have to share today is fantastic to see how actually things are changing. Still, the drones and driverless cars are still being kind of held back. So my question is, how long do you think, with the changes happening in your, let's say, bit of a guesstimation here, how long do you think it will take for these things to actually realize and come out in this society? And I still think it's one of the legal, because of the legal framework, is being held back.
Look, I think how long is that working?
I don't think it is.
Yes? Okay, great. How long it's going to take for those technologies themselves to become widely adopted, I won't kind of ponder on that. But in terms of whether the regulation is holding it back, I don't actually think it is. I think what's
Thanks very much. Phil, up the front here. Catherine?
Thanks, Philip Argy. One of the great dilemmas for law firms historically, and I've been in this space since the late 60s, should I reveal my age, is how do you keep the benefit? Because the problem with the 6-minute unit that you referred to is that you're saving time and you're saving your cost, but you've got to give away all the benefit because client won't let you double your rate to equate for the value that you're delivering the client. And government is the worst example. They buy on hourly rate. They don't want to hear that you can do it in 5 minutes when someone else can take 5 hours. They say that, so be it. It's hopeless. I mean, you really need to educate the market that you guys are using this intelligently, and intelligent lawyers are. And it's a big issue. I'll put to one side the father and son going around making prognostications of a very sus kind about the loss of lawyers, but I agree with you about moving up the value chain. They're tools. I mean, you know, the chef isn't lying awake all night worrying that he'll be out of business by the Thermomix. You know, it's just cook better. Anyway, keeping the benefit is the hard bit.
I think is this working again? It's kind of flashing at me. Why don't I use that one? I almost could have planted that question. I promise I didn't, but thank you, Phil, because I've only been with HSF for 6 months, and it is a return for me to the legal industry. I've been in the tech industry for most of my career, and this is one of the things that, you know, I debate quite heavily within HSF and with my boss in terms of transforming our business model. And if you think back to that slide that we put up in terms of the disruptors, it's not just tech that's disrupting, they're disrupting business models. And I think to your point, and a lot of lawyers still think like this, well, why would we want to drive efficiencies through technology when we bill by the 6-minute unit? Why would we want to be more efficient? Now, I've personally never really bought into that. I think if you do your work well and you do it efficiently, you get more work. But I think we've got to really rethink the business model of law and charging by time, which in and of itself is an inefficient way to charge, and actually look at how we start charging for the tech and how we start charging for the value. And that's my job at HSF, is to look at how we transform that business model. And I continue to tell my boss that, you know, we shouldn't be looking for how we can get more out of people. I mean, we're wonderful, but we're infinitely limited. There's only so many of us. There's only so, you know, there's only so much we're willing to be paid. And, you know, we really need to be looking at technology to drive exponential revenue and exponential savings. So I think it's transformation of the business model is the key.
Thank you. Another question just up the front here. Yep.
My question is about the blockchain you mentioned. What does make A&B legally acceptable? Is it in its consensus model, or just because government is starting it? What is the advantage?
That it actually be legally compliant, so the contracts actually will be binding. I think that will be, that of itself is the point that obviously as part of the A&B, they're actually going to have to pilot and develop a system to ensure that the contracts are legally binding. How that's done yet, I think, is to be explored. But yeah, that's so under Australian law that if you use A&B and you devise a smart contract, that actually it is a contract that is legally binding and obviously can be enforced in court, just like any paper-based contract. But that's to be devised. It's at the beginning. So how that works.
So if it's a decentralized blockchain, so there's no difference between this one and the other ones. So we choose this one to accept, but not the other ones.
Look, and at that point, I don't know enough about that area to, all I know is that they are looking to create an Australian platform that's open to the public, that is permanent and reusable. So I know that the other blockchains I'm aware of in Australia, I think have been quite difficult to get off the ground. They've been very focused on a very particular transaction and not reusable. And so the driver for them has been to actually come up with something that can be.
I think you should look at it a little bit like, and the way that we're talking about it is like a public utility. right? And just like, you know, public utilities in Australia have been deregulated now for quite a period of time, and I guess blockchain is just starting off being deregulated. But like any other utility, there are key players in those markets. And what we're expecting with the Australian National Blockchain being the first is we're not saying that there will not be other utilities in this space, but certainly, you know, if you think about, you know, the Telstra or the Origin Energy, you know, I think you need to look at it in that respect, that it will be broadly accessible, it will be reusable, but by no means is it going to be the only one out there.
I think the analogy they often use is like blockchain is like the smartphone, which smartphone you'll pick, and the apps that will go on it.
And
Whether that's how it will work would be interesting.
Thank you.
Might just, there's a couple of other people, but if it's a quick one, just add on.
Is this related to the Red Belly blockchain that CSIRO and Data 61 is working on, or it's not related?
It's different. So that they are working with us on the Australian National Blockchain, and that's really at the focus of that at the moment is the smart contracting. Yeah.
Just at the back there, Catherine.
Just a comment on various utility of blockchain. If you have multiple blockchains, it defeats the purpose of having that decentralized ledger. So really, that needs to be thought carefully. You cannot have multiple blockchains, because then to utilize the function of the chain, you got to be part of that chain, and then you need to create interoperability between the chains as well. So that's something to look at. However, another comment on smart contracts. Yes, smart contracts technically are existent, but do we have the legal framework to support that?
Well, I think to Mel's point, you know, the answer is at the moment, no. And this is another area where the regulators are really going to have to catch up. Look, I think the fundamentals are there in terms of, you know, contract law has not changed since Philip Argy started practicing it in the 1960s. It really hasn't. I mean,
you're being dated now. Right, a reply.
I mean, contract law, really, the fundamentals of contract law have not changed. I don't think they will.
I mean, I have very strong views that the law is perfectly fine in 99% of cases. It's the lawyers that are the problem. I mean, the problem is still, it's changed a little bit, but it's down to about 99% of lawyers now don't know the difference between a megabyte and a mozzybyte, and you know, and even fewer judges. But contracts depend on fact. Was it signed? Was it legally binding? Was it witnessed if it had to be witnessed? Have the conditions been met or not met? They're all testable conditions. The law, I mean, Moses didn't need to know about laser guns to know that thou shalt not murder, covered murder by laser. Didn't need to write that into the 10 Commandments. The stones were probably written by laser, but anyway, it's another issue. But really, the base, if you get the fundamental principles right, all of these are rules-based systems. If you can articulate the rule, they are all self-enforcing. Everything's self-enforcing. The challenge is to get the lawyers who are smart enough to articulate the rules and code them in an unfamiliar, something that's unfamiliar to lawyers. They don't realise they are actually programmers, most of them, but they don't realise that yet.
And on, oh, sorry, I was
just going to say, so the principles of contract law, I don't think actually prevent us moving to things like blockchain. I just think it's how we implement them.
And on that note, I'm standing between yourselves and further opportunities to network with a fabulous turnout. Mel, Hilary, thank you very much for a thought-provoking session tonight. That really concludes our presentation. So in the traditional way, please show your appreciation. And in the usual way, Catherine, I think I'm on solid ground here. We will ensure that everyone here gets a survey that's going to be emailed to them. And you'll have the opportunity to provide your feedback on your takeaways, relevance, and future topics, because we want to keep... Yeah, that's right. And that's exactly right. Now, I think we've got to change the slides now for... I've got it here, yep, I can do that. Perfect. Okay, I had the answer in my hand. So we've got a couple of exciting events coming up, which you can register for. In October, we've got Jared Cohen, who's the co-founder of Nomad VR, and for the past year has been using virtual reality. This is pretty exciting for some of the work that we're doing in aged care at the moment. So using virtual reality to bridge that gap between the nursing homes and the outside world to re-engage aged care residents with the freedom to explore the universe. In November, we've got Craig Cobb, founder of tradercobb.com, speaking on cryptocurrency. So there you go, another blockchain derivative. So that's coming up. Hopefully we can change the slide again. And that concludes all the formalities for tonight. We really would like you to stay and meet somebody new and perhaps somebody that you haven't seen for a while. If you want to look into membership, because there's quite a few people here that I think are dying to rejoin ACS after some absence, just see the good folks at the back of the room there and they can help you out. Thanks very much and enjoy tonight's catering. It's been put on.
I've learned to listen to these silent streets. The pavement morning, it's iniquities. Inner city accolades, cyber city escapades. I'm blistering from persistence. These choices weren't made for distance. I'm hurting but I'm insistent that I can't live like this no more. Yeah, I won't live like this no more, no more, no more. I've lived in my head a whole year inside it, alone and in hiding. Took 10 bucks to find it out. Took 10 bucks to climb right out. I was looking for a reason and a ride home. I was looking for a reason and a ride home. I was thinking how you told me it was terrible. I was looking for a reason and a ride home, a ride home. I was looking for a reason, yeah.
Same old standards, different chapters. Do you feel alive now? You feel alright now? you.